Welcome to Dive In, where I take a look into rules, lore, and history of different tabletop games and more. This video and all my content is made possible by my Patreon supporters, and it's dedicated to everyone who subscribes to my channel. You're all the reasons why this keeps going. Thank you. Join the Legion today at patreon.com/63rdlegion for free. Joining my paid tiers allows you early access to my content, a shout out in my videos, homebrew D&D items for your games, and a chance to play some D&D in the Patreon community. We now have a Discord. It's just getting started, but we have some future plans coming, like events for the members as well as Patreon events. Let me ask you something. You like Gundam? Do you enjoy games like Mech Warrior but hate how small the miniatures are? Well, guess what? 40K has that. Let me introduce you to the Knights. Why are they called Knights? Good question, and I am happy to answer that. Heads up, like everything in 40K, there is over 10,000 years of in-game lore that we're going to have to move through to fully appreciate this faction. Long before the Age of Strife, where humanity fell into hell and the Earth was turned into a toxic wasteland of techno-barbarians, humanity decided it was time to spread its wings and explore the wider galaxy. To do this, the colony arcs were created. Each ship was loaded full of colonists, enough to jumpstart a population, and little more. Now, if you're thinking this is horrible, think again. Humanity had created the ultimate innovation, STC technology. STC, or Standard Template Construct, were amazing machines that could build anything. All it was needed was material and an STC file. And those colony arcs were also loaded full of those files. Now, while this does sound impressive, this barely covers what an STC is, because the STC could build anything. Weapons, farming tools, vehicles, homes, and more. Its only limitations were material and what files it had available. Fully loaded and launched, the colony ships would begin the journey to a world marked for colonization. Once there, the arcs would land and become completely useless, basically making this a one-way trip. This was done on purpose, as now the newly established colony could render the arc down for needed materials and feed it to the STC, thereby allowing them to form a settlement in a matter of days. Out of all the STC files the colonists had, the most impressive were massive humanoid-shaped machines. These machines that stood over 30 feet tall came with a number of secondary files that could outfit them for a variety of gear to fulfill different purposes, such as mining, logging, construction, and of course, defense. Now, after all these new colony worlds were established, humanity back home started a massive technological and evolutionary boom. And this was the worst thing that could happen. The first of the boom came in the form of warp technology. Humans could now traverse the galaxy at a much faster rate by entering the space between reality known as the warp. It was around this time that a new path of human evolution was unlocked, and the birth of the Psyker had begun. These beings could access the warp itself and alter reality to their whim, and could expand their minds, allowing for telepathic communication and telekinetic abilities. We'll get to why this was bad in a second, because we also need to talk about the next boom, true artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about what we have. This is true AI, machines that can think and feel on their own. Now, why is all this bad? Doesn't faster than light travel, psychic abilities, and AI sound great? No. First, let's talk about the warp and psychers. The warp is more than just the space between reality. It is raw emotions and thought given form and life. Every emotion you feel has an echo within the warp, and the stronger the emotion, the more dangerous the effect it would have. Now, imagine what this would mean for someone who could easily feel the warp. Those that were less reliable, who had warp-born abilities, became easily manipulated by the warp, because as I've already said, the warp is alive. These people became monsters and tyrants, made even worse as they pushed their abilities and ripped holes in reality that allowed things within the warp to come out into our world. Now let's talk about the straw that broke humanity itself, the AI. We all know where this is going. Just look at our history up to the point I'm making this video. If you came into being right now with the intelligence of an entire world at your disposal, how would you view humanity? Now imagine how things were at this point in the lore. The AI looked at its creators and saw a wasteful race of creatures that, given the slightest power, would kill and enslave everything in their path. After a massive war, the AI had been defeated, but now everything was in ruin. Humanity was now spread amongst the stars, and most of their technology was destroyed, and warp storms raged, cutting off travel through the warp. Now maybe humanity could rebound and repair itself, but something else had happened. The STC technology that allowed humans to prosper at a much faster rate had actually made us pretty lazy. After all, what's the point of knowing how to make things if you can push a button and just get it? Now, the worst part about all this was when the war began, the people who understood the technology the best were the ones who died in the opening of the war, as they were the greatest enemies of the AI. Now, there is some good news. The original colonies were unaffected by this. They lacked warp travel or AI because they predated it. These colonies were never supposed to be linked together or to Earth till long after they were set up, and the Age of Strife had begun and officially ended any plans to unite them. Now completely cut off from the wider galaxy, the original colonies just kept going. Now, I mentioned earlier the colonies were using their mechs for a wide array of things, including defense. Some planets not only had dangerous predators, but had populations of xenospecies that weren't too happy to share their world. Or maybe they were, and it didn't end the way after humans started showing up. Let's face it, there's a theme for our species and how we handle things. Slowly, the use of the mechs turned from a variety of things to being solely for warfare. As time went on, the pilots of these mechs began to be seen in a heroic light and soon were equated to the stories of Earth's ancient knights. As days became centuries, the colony society became techno-feudal states ruled over by the noble knight houses and their mechanical knights. Now, back home on Earth, the Emperor had risen and the new age was beginning with the Great Crusade. To help him find and unite humanity, the Emperor created what is known as the Rogue Trader. We'll do a video on them later. Trust me, they're a great faction. These rogue traders were sent out into the galaxy to both mark empty worlds ready for colonization and reclaim established colonies. It was the rogue traders that began to find the night worlds, and what they found interested them greatly. After the Age of Strife, STC technology had become rare, but on night worlds, the STC was the very foundation of their technology. Worlds with fully functioning STCs were a goldmine for the Imperium and its new ally, the Mechanicum. We need to pause real quick. The Mechanicum is not the Mechanicus. The Mechanicus is part of the Imperium, but the Mechanicum was its own entity at this point, and it was an aligned nation of the Imperium. I needed to say this for later on, trust me. Now, back on the night worlds, the rogue traders did find something else on those worlds that was interesting. While the STC technology was at its core, no one knew how it worked. Much like the majority of the human colonies that were separated after the Age of Strife, the night worlds had become so dependent on STCs, they didn't actually understand them anymore. Those that did died off of old age centuries ago. As time moved on, the night worlds were finding their technology dying and had to do their best to keep it going. Most night worlds had actually technologically regressed to earlier stages, such as steam engines. Some had lost everything, save for the night mechs. Even the night mechs, which were still running, lost all their advanced weapons and now simply used oversized versions of basic weapons. With news of the night worlds hitting the Imperium and Mechanicum, envoys were sent out in large numbers, hoping to bring the night worlds into the folds of the two empires. Both the Imperium and Mechanicum decided to handle the situation differently. The Imperium offered the night worlds freedom to rule themselves without interference, allowing them to ignore Imperial types, and in return they would receive help in bringing back their technology. While they would ignore military types to feed the Imperial war machine, the night worlds would instead be their own military that would march under the Imperial banner. In the meantime, the Mechanicum went in a little underhanded in their approach. Firstly, any night world that was near a world capable of housing industry that had no colony, the Mechanicum could use their treaty with the Imperium to claim the world and make it a forge world that now neighbored the night world, thereby creating a new bond between the night world and the forge world to work towards mutual protection and trade. The next step was expressing another part of their treaty with the Imperium, and that is their purpose to maintain the Imperium's technology. You see, the Mechanicum had a real stranglehold on the Imperium. The Forge World were the suppliers of all Imperial tech, and it was the Mechanicum's tech priests that maintained all technology. With the Imperium's new alliance with the Night Worlds, it meant the Mechanicum wouldn't be the ones maintaining the Night Worlds technology, but they would be the ones to teach the Night Worlds on how to do it. And they did this by converting all those the Night Worlds sent for training into members of the Cult of the Machine. These individuals were now members of the cult, but not officially a part of the Mechanicum. You know, the people in charge of the cult of the machine. Using this, they gained more influence with Night Worlds that neighbored Forge Worlds. Those Night Worlds never signed a treaty with the Imperium, but instead signed up with the Mechanicum. Now, to fast forward a bit, the Horus Heresy had begun. The Night Worlds were not immune to this. Like the rest of the Imperial military or the Mechanicum, they divided between Horus and the Emperor. In the end, all worlds that aligned with Horus were labeled traitor and were now seen as enemies. It was at this point the Mechanicum was destroyed and reformed into the Mechanicus, and the Codex took control of the Space Marines. But, unlike the rest of the military, the Night Worlds stayed the same. After 10,000 years, the treaties with the Night Worlds have stayed completely unchanged. Those that align with the Imperium are still exempt from tithes, but still offer up their knights for war when called upon. The only real change to them is the Imperial religion, which was created by Chaos worshippers, yeah, that's a video we're going to need to do, have taken root. Night Worlds aligned with the Mechanicus have had their ties between Forge Worlds strengthened. Now, these knights tend to only serve in the defense of the Forge World they are neighboring, or with the Titan Legions or Mechanicus military. Okay, as I've already stated, the Night Worlds are completely immune to the Imperial tithe. What is that exactly? Every world in the Imperium has a tithe they must pay to the Imperium. These include Space Marine worlds. Depending on what type of world it is, that dictates what tithe it is. Space Marine worlds must pay a tithe of gene seed for storage and examination. Agri worlds must supply food, industrial worlds must supply raw materials, funeral worlds must supply space for graves, and finally, worlds that are just normal must supply humans for the Imperium to keep moving. Night worlds supply no tithe. As such, they not only maintain themselves, but have their own military structure to follow, and that structure is 100% mech. No foot soldiers or tanks, just mechs, though there are planetary defense forces that do use soldiers. Now, how do you pilot a knight? Ever watch Gundam Wing and see Epion or Zero? Yeah, kinda like that. The human pilots take part in a ritual known as the Ritual of Becoming. This allows their minds to merge with a rudimentary AI of the knight, giving them complete control over it, simplifying the complications of piloting a 30-foot tall walking machine. Now, the merge only happens when the pilot sits in the throne of the Mechanicum. That is the pilot's seat that connects the pilot to the machine through the helm. The process of being connected to the knight is pretty jarring at first. You see, the war spirit contains the memories of all the previous pilots. By the way, no, I don't mean machine spirit. A knight has a war spirit. All other machines with rudimentary AI have machine spirits. Now, once a pilot connects the first time to the war spirit, it is a painful event, as the war spirit's collective thoughts can fight back against the new pilot, though this isn't always the case. In the novel Assassinorum Kingmaker, we get to see multiple rituals of becoming, and each one is different. The first is where a Calidus assassin attempts the ritual and it doesn't go well. In the end, she is able to do it, but it takes a lot out of her. The next rituals go completely different, with one going horribly wrong and the other one being instant and a strong connection. Now, there are multiple types of knights in 40k, and each come with a place in the society of the knight houses. Like most STC creations, knights all share a very similar structure, with few exceptions. So looking at the knights, it's really hard to tell them apart. Let's just say I had the 40k shop pulled up the whole time I was reading Kingmaker, because past the first basic two and the smallest one, I got confused a lot. Now, I'm going to say this, we will not be talking about the Cerastus and the Acastus Knight STC patterns. For you new to 40k, these types of knights could only be purchased from GW's secondary company, Forge World, and were expensive. Now, Forge World is gone, and we're seeing a merger of product lines happening, but more importantly, these knight patterns aren't in the Knight Codex, and only right now the Cerastus is available to purchase, but only for the game Horus Heresy. So unless someone paid a lot of money and grabbed their rules for them, you will not be seeing them on the tabletop. So we're only going to be talking about the knights that you can get at your local store, buy and use in 40k. Firstly, let's look at the armature, or as some call it, the revealing fact that being a knight isn't cool. While the standard knights are 30 feet tall, armatures are only around 20 feet tall. The shortest knights are also the ones that get dumped on the most on Night Worlds. Generally, these knights are only given to nobles of lesser houses. Yeah, Night Worlds are techno-feudal societies, remember? Ranks are not based on merit, it's based on where you were born and who you were born to. Armature pilots are generally pretty low on the totem pole and are mistreated as such. We see this in the Helm Mechanicum, which is a lesser version of the Throne Mechanicum that serves a darker purpose. Once bound to the Helm Mechanicum, the pilot isn't just linked to the knight, but is under the direct control of a knight of higher placement. Yeah, control. While some would see this as a way of coordinating between knights, only armatures are fitted with this and are forced to obey orders in this way. The armature size also dictates the armaments that they can carry into battle, leaving them with lesser weapons but still dangerous ones. Unlike normal knights, the armatures can also operate in packs of up to 3 to compensate for their lesser weapons, though a single knight of higher placement can force their will on all 3 of them at once. Errants and paladins are the most common of the knight patterns, as they are armed with both ranged and close combat options, offering plenty of balance in warfare, though the two are armed with different ranged weapons. The Errant is an anti-armor killing machine. Its main weapon is a thermal cannon, one of the largest melta-based weapons the Imperium uses. This weapon fires a beam of intense heat that can melt anything, regardless of if it's flesh or metal. The Paladin is a dream of artillery batteries everywhere, armed with a rapid-fire artillery battle cannon. Yes, rapid-fire artillery. This cannon is half the size of the knight itself. Once fired, it launches up to 2 shells across the battlefield, which have earned it the nickname Twin Thunder. From there, both these patterns are outfitted with a Reaper chainsword, which is actually a 15-foot long chainsaw with an engine the size of a car, with teeth that are as hard as diamonds. The Warden is an anti-infantry knight, based around the same pattern idea as the Paladin or Errant, but instead uses the Avenger Gatling cannon. This multi-barreled cannon fires foot-long shells in fast succession, and even if you get under the weapon's firing arc, it has a giant flamethrower attached underneath the gun. The reason why this knight has been removed in this section from the Errant and Paladin is while the previous two are the backbones of knight armies, the Wardens desire to make themselves icons within the forces they are in. This is due to them being able to break enemy lines with little effort. Any pilot looking to make a name for themselves quickly tries to find themselves in a Warden, and sometimes they will do things that are kind of underhanded to claim one of these knights. Gallants are the hotheads of any knight house. These knights are limited in range. When I say that, I mean they take a single ranged weapon because it's already attached to the body of a knight. Though if they feel like it, they can add some more weapons onto the body for range. Though these ranged weapons will only ever be used on targets that are trying to escape it. These knights only have 2 weapons during war. The first is the Reaper chainsword, and the second is called a Thunder Strike Gauntlet. Now I should say all knights can replace their normal close combat weapon with a gauntlet, but gallant knights refuse not to use them. This massive fist is effectively a battering ram with a force field generator within it, making it hit even harder. The Crusader is geared towards one thing, and it's the complete opposite of the Gallant. That's right, ranged combat. Generally, these knights are armed with a thermal cannon and an Avenger Gatling cannon, making them perfect for both anti-infantry and anti-armor. But some choose to arm themselves with a rapid-fire artillery cannon over the thermal. These knights are generally piloted by the most selfless of nobles. They don't seek the glory the Warden might bring, or battle honors of the Gallant. They instead prefer to plant their feet and control avenues of fire, acting as mobile weapon platforms that take what position is needed the most. The final knight of this pattern is the Preceptor. The Preceptor is armed with a las impulse cannon. This cannon is a massive laser-based weapon that has a shorter range to other knight weapons, but it more than makes up for it. This weapon builds up its charge within, unleashing its energy towards the enemy in a volley of shots that can burn force fields and destroy armor. This weapon is so rare, there was once an entire campaign to reclaim the STC after the Dark Mechanicum had got their hands on it. Now, all the knights we've gone over so far are Questus pattern knights, and there is one other pattern of knights still in use in 40k that is rare, the Dominus pattern. And as of right now, there are only 2 types of these knights, the Castellan and the Valiant patterns. These knights are much broader and more heavily armored. This has led to many knight houses refusing to allow anyone under the world's rulership to pilot them. It's rare to see any knight world capable of fielding 2 Dominus pattern knights. knights on a single battlefield, but it's not impossible. On the battlefield, seeing a Dominus pattern knight is hard to miss. While it's only slightly bigger than a standard pattern of knight, its body is covered in a variety of weapons. That includes phase shift missiles, melta-guns, and siege cannons. These knights are able to do this due to them having a much more powerful energy source. Also, to help use the extra weapons, each Dominus pattern knight comes equipped with servitors. What is a servitor? It's a lobotomized human turned into an organic computer because it's illegal to have AI. That's all I'm going to say about that, because that's its own rabbit hole of no return once we get started. The Castellan is a mobile artillery platform. It's armed with two massive long-range weapons, the first of which is a plasma decimator, a cannon that fires white-hot plasma across the battlefield. And if you know 40k, plasma is dangerous to those who wield it. If the pilot is careless, they could overheat the plasma and damage the knight itself. Thankfully, the knight being machine makes it easier to handle. Humans who are careless with a plasma weapon tend not to live long enough to regret their choices. It's also armed with a volcano lance. This is a long-range cannon capable of rending enemy knights into melted slag. Whatever this weapon is aimed at tends to vanish once it's fired. To place this into context, most lance weaponry is used in space warfare, and this is on a mech. The Valiant is made to take the fight to the enemy. It is at its heart a siege engine, made to charge into the thick of it and lay waste to the enemy. To do this, it carries low-ranged weapons that pack a horrific punch. The first of these weapons is the Conflagration Cannon. For you who don't know, that means intense fire. This weapon is in fact 3 massive flamethrowers over 15 feet long bound together. Once fired, it unleashes a wave of flames that reduce everything in their way to ash. The next weapon is really unusual and completely awesome, the Thunder Coil Harpoon. And yes, it is what it sounds like. It is a giant harpoon that can not only hook and pull targets in, but it also electrifies them when it hits. Do I need to go into the sheer size of this harpoon? No, I don't think so. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the 2 patterns of knights that are no longer in 40k but still in Horus Heresy, but there is something we need to go over. Both look remarkably different from the standard patterns of knights we're talking about, and that's because they are different at their fundamental core. All the knights we've talked about started out their history as engines for the colonies to survive, only later evolving into engines of war, but not these two, as they were only made for warfare. To finish this out, we need to just quickly talk about the Night Worlds themselves. Due to their autonomy from the Imperium, they're kind of a loose cannon at times. While most worlds have Imperial oversight and require Imperial sanctions for new leadership, the Night Worlds are at the whim of whichever house holds complete power over the world. On average, Night Worlds have close to a dozen houses of nobility, each with their own hierarchy, not just within themselves, but also with the world itself. As houses change places in the hierarchy, the potential list of those that have the right to claim the world as theirs changes drastically. In the end, the only thing that holds Night Worlds to remain within the Imperium is fear of what will happen if they refuse to fight for them. And sometimes that's not enough. If that interests you, then check out the book I've already mentioned, Assassinorum Kingmaker, because that's the whole plot. It has everything you could want from a 40k novel: assassins, mech suits, no space marines, and horrors humans can't handle. Okay everyone, that's where we'll end things. That was the lore of the Imperial Knights. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I can't wait to come back and talk about more 40k. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Artificer tier. Thank you John Martin, Christopher R. Hunter, Java Squirrel, Matthew Denz, and Jonathan Haynes. You guys rock.